Auckland bus drivers get a whopping $1.91 pay rise. A character clash sees a housing development hit the skids in Auckland's leafy eastern burbs. There's a coffee crisis brewing. We're short at least 2,000 baristas. The remarkable mountain rescue whiteout blizzard conditions, an avalanche and a night in a snow cave. And shot-putting legend Tom Walsh tears up ahead of the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. The Principals Federation says the bomb threats made against schools around the country came from an overseas cyberbot. At least a dozen schools have received bomb hoaxes today and 4 were made yesterday. It's led to widespread disruption, with many of the targeted schools needing to evacuate. Principals Federation President Cherie Taylor-Patel says the hoaxes are distressing for those affected. She's spoken to Education Secretary Iona Holstead.
The Ministry have said that their understanding is that this actually was a cyberbot coming in from overseas, and it apparently has happened a couple of years ago, so it has happened before.
Police Minister Chris Hipkins, who is also Education Minister, says the people behind the threats are idiots.
It is concerning. It's an incredibly challenging thing for schools to have to face.
Chris Hipkins says police and the Ministry of Education are supporting schools to have plans to deal with threats. And police are talking to 2 young people after a threat was made against Marlborough Girls College this afternoon. The school went into lockdown shortly before 3 p.m. The move followed another threat made against the college yesterday. Tasman Area Commander Simon Feltham says both schools are not thought to be linked to the other threats against schools. A cardiologist at Wellington Hospital fears patients could die on waiting lists as surgeries are delayed. The Cardiac Society is warning patients needing urgent procedures are now waiting much longer than normal. It says some heart patients are waiting weeks in hospital for operations. Wellington cardiologist and Cardiac Society spokesperson Dr. Scott Harding says there could be dire consequences.
This is not just a Wellington problem, it's a national problem at the moment. What we want to do is try and address this or have some mechanism for addressing it before, people start having adverse events on the waiting list. It can be a heart attack, it can be death, it can be developing heart failure.
Te Whatu Ora, the new health authority, says it's monitoring pressure on the health system and is working to ensure there is minimal impact on cardiac surgery. The Bus Drivers Union says they want to see their base wage increased to at least $30 an hour. Drivers in Auckland are getting an 8% raise, taking their average pay to $25.62 an hour. However, one bus driver says their colleagues in Wellington are already getting $27. First Union Assistant General Secretary Louisa Jones says a way to improve bus services is ensuring drivers are well paid and have good working conditions.
We want to see all of the people in Auckland and right across New Zealand choosing public transport to get to work. And we want to see bus drivers having really good careers as bus drivers. And so today is definitely one step towards where we want to go.
Louisa Jones says operators are finding it more and more difficult to hire new drivers. Roading officials say New Zealand is on track to meet reduction targets for road deaths and serious injuries, despite the road toll increasing last year. The Road to Zero monitoring program aims to have a 40% drop in deaths and serious injuries by 2030 compared to 2018. Its 2021 report shows 320 deaths and 2,323 serious injuries last year, an 11% drop. Te Manatū Waka's Ministry of Transport's Brian Sherritt describes New Zealand's situation as diabolical. He says infrastructure and policy settings need attention.
Some of these things are quite challenging, I have to say, as well. I mean, you might think that the installation of a median barrier on a roadway is a relatively straightforward thing, but in almost every case it involves significant widening of the road.
Brian Sherritt says the scale and pace of implementing safety measures is critical. It's 5:04. World Cup winning former All Blacks coach Sir Steve Hansen believes a division between New Zealand rugby and leading players has contributed to the All Blacks' woes. The series loss to Ireland means the All Blacks have won just one of their last 5 tests. Hansen told Today FM he backs his former assistant Ian Foster in the top job and believes wider issues within NZR are causing problems.
They've come out and aired all their dirty washing in the front part of the property rather out the back. You know, the relationship between the board and the exec with the players at the moment is probably the worst it's ever been. The way they handled the new money scheme, you know, Brent Impey came out and just absolutely roasted the players. So I don't think they're doing their job right at the moment.
Meanwhile, the 20-minute red card law will be used again in the upcoming Rugby Championship. The trial law allows a red-carded player to be replaced after 20 minutes. Tom Walsh concedes he's in unknown territory after being named as joint flag bearer for New Zealand at the Birmingham Commonwealth Games and hopes he doesn't stuff it up. The defending Games shot put champion and 6-time squash medalist Joelle King will lead the team at tomorrow morning's opening ceremony.
Both Joelle and myself haven't been to an opening or a closing ceremony. Hopefully we do it right. Generally for an explosive sport like mine, standing 5 hours on your feet and walking around is not the greatest thing.
And All Whites midfielder Sarpreet Singh has re-signed with the German football giants Bayern Munich but will again be out on loan to second division club Jan Regensburg. That's the news.
Ashley Bloomfield bows out.
So it feels like a bit of a burden lifted because it's just been such an intense and relentless pandemic. I feel like I've given it my everything.
The Crusaders coach could be going.
I want to win Rugby World Cup, but I want to win it with 2 different countries. I'm not sure how that plays out. Those decisions are not mine.
And Nick Smith is coming back.
I'm keen on Nick. I like his straightforwardness.
He has his pluses and his minuses, like all politicians.
The to and fro of news. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National on air, online and on demand. Here's the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Showers with thunderstorms possible until early tomorrow morning. Showers clearing for Bay of Plenty by tomorrow afternoon and easing elsewhere. Rain developing from Taranaki to Wellington tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers today, mainly about the ranges. Fine for tomorrow. Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson, showers clearing for early tomorrow morning but returning to Nelson, Marlborough tomorrow evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers possibly heavy in the north, turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning and afternoon. Canterbury, scattered rain, fine spells for tomorrow and isolated evening showers. North and central Otago and Dunedin, patchy rain or drizzle today. Fine spells for tomorrow with a few showers from the afternoon. Clutha and Southland, rain or drizzle for today with showers tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy with showers. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi marama, tēnā koutou katoa no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. At least a dozen schools across the country have been forced into lockdown or evacuated after being threatened by phone. Police are investigating after schools in Masterton, Kaikoura, Greymouth, Queenstown, Levin, Whanganui, Ralston, Takaka, Geraldine, Dunstan, Ashburton and Palmerston North were targeted. It is the second time this week serious threats have been directed at schools, and while some chose to evacuate, others went into lockdown and resumed classes later in the day. Joining us now is Assistant Police Commissioner Bruce O'Brien. Kia ora, Bruce.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
What can you tell us about the threat?
Well, look, what I can say is, as you've touched on, there was a number of schools today and 5 schools on Tuesday that have received telephone threats of a nature posing a threat to students and staff at those particular schools. We've been working with schools that have been affected by this and appreciate the disruption it's not only caused to the students, but obviously the operation of the school, and then obviously the distress not only to the students but also their parents as well. So we're working really closely with the schools to provide that reassurance. But on the other side of it, we're working really hard to understand and identify the origins of these calls and ultimately hold the person or persons responsible.
Are they recorded messages?
From what we can tell at this point, it appears that they're computer-generated voice calls. We're obviously looking into how they're generated and where they're generated from. So we will work with our cybercrime teams here, but also our partners internationally if we need to establish where the origins of those calls are originating from.
And are they all bomb threats, Bruce?
Look, the majority of them are talking to explosive devices and...
Sorry, I just lost you there. Sorry, Bruce, you just cut out then. Could you say that again, please? What are the majority of threats?
Yeah, the majority of the threats do mention an explosive device, and that's why we believe they are originating from the same person, from the same origin. So we're continually working on that to establish that, and as I say, hold that person to account. But the main thing is that I'd like to reassure parents and students that we are doing everything we can to identify the location of the threat, and working closely with the schools and in their preparation and the emergency management of those particular incidents when they occur.
Bruce, but are you convinced it's offshore at this point, coming from offshore?
I can't be 100% certain that they are originating from offshore, but we are looking into that. We did have an incident back in 2017 where we had a number of schools suffer a similar threat, and the perpetrator for that was based offshore, and they were held to account because we work with our international partners on this. So that's where we will be looking at where this is originating. If it is from New Zealand, we will be dealing with that as well. So I would just ask anybody, if they do have any information, to contact police as well.
Is there any call to action in the threat? I mean, are they asking for anything? Do they want anything? Money?
Look, Lisa, I'm not going to go into the particular nature of that, but what I would say is they are of a harmful nature, and they obviously cause enough concern for schools to either go into lockdown or evacuations. So they're of a level of threat that the schools are acting, but we will be looking into all nature of that as part of our investigation.
Usually when things come via a bot or cyber attacks, they offer the person getting the threat a way to make them stop, and that's usually by paying up. So are the schools being asked for basically ransom money or money to make it stop?
No, there's nothing to suggest that's the case. These are threats more to cause distress to the school and obviously disruption.
Are you convinced that there is no real danger?
The information that we would suggest at the moment is the threat level is low. However, we remind the schools to take the appropriate action when they do receive these type of threats. But from the information that I have at the moment, it would suggest that the threat level is low, but be mindful that the distress that this causes, not only to the schools, but the parents that are of the students as well.
Given that this could be from offshore and potentially computer-based, which other government agencies are helping you with your investigation?
Look, we work with a number of different law enforcement partners offshore in these types of investigations, so there's not one particular agency that we work with. We obviously conduct the investigation and work with the partner agency that we need to get to the bottom of this.
Are you expecting more of these to come?
I'm hoping not, Lisa, but we're working really, really hard to identify the origin to prevent this from occurring further. Being mindful that there's the disruption that it is causing and distress it's causing to the school. So we're doing everything we can to identify that person or persons.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Assistant Police Commissioner Bruce O'Brien there. Beleaguered bus services in Auckland are being cancelled at an average rate of almost 1,500 a day. Auckland Transport figures show in July there were some days with almost 2,000 cancellations. AT announced today it's giving its drivers a pay rise after earlier saying it simply doesn't have enough of them to keep the wheels turning in the super city. Finn Blackwell has the story.
Thank you. Tens of thousands of Aucklanders catch a bus each day, and today, Auckland Transport and the Council announced hourly pay for the city's bus drivers will go up to $25.62, a pay rise of $1.91. So what do they think?
It's taken too long to get that far, and it's still not really enough.
Feeling good when the pays increase up, so it's better for us.
As a bus driver, you have a lot of responsibility, And in Wellington, it's already increased to 27. And 25 is now what it's better.
The pay increase comes amid a chronic staff shortage caused by winter illness and COVID. On the 4th of July, there were 1,970 bus cancellations. The day after that, 1,600 cancellations. The next day, back to almost 1,900. Almost every day in July, there were at least 1,000 services canned. The city's mayor, Phil Goff, says the fleet was already short about 270 drivers out of a workforce of about 2,500.
But on top of that, the impact of COVID and winter flu means that probably we're about 490 people short at the present time.
He says plans for further pay increases are already in motion to make the service more reliable for commuters.
Lifting the wages and then with further improvements to conditions means that we'll be able to recruit and to retain the bus drivers we need.
First Union says they've been pushing for an increase for a long time and says this is just the start. Assistant General Secretary Louisa Jones says bus operators are finding it more and more difficult to find and retain staff.
We want to see all of the people in Auckland and right across New Zealand choosing public transport to get to work. And we want to see bus drivers having really good careers as bus drivers. And so today is definitely one step towards where we want to go.
Commuters have also been feeling the pinch.
My children have. The buses that they take to and from school have been cancelled.
This is a rare trip for me into town.
Sometimes if you're on the other side of the town, they said 50% chances of getting cancelled because of short stuff.
Auckland Transport's Chief Executive, Mark Lambert, says they know more increases will be needed and today's pay bump should help offset record inflation and cost of living pressures.
And if you were listening to that on radio, check out the video. We'll put it on our webpage. 1 in 6 Kiwis have been homeless. Tonight, about 41,000 of us will be bedding down without adequate access to housing. That is basically the population of Gisborne. And more than a quarter of people are struggling to make ends meet at the end of the month as inflation cracks 7%. Now, that's according to new research for Orange Sky that provides mobile laundry and shower services and support to people experiencing homelessness. It's Aotearoa Operations Manager Eddie Winnie joins us now. Kia ora, Eddie.
Kia ora, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
That sounds pretty grim.
Look, I think it's been no secret that it's been pretty tough the last year or two with COVID, and it's not just people doing it rough on the streets. Even families have been doing it tough, making ends meet. It's not been a great time for a lot of people, I think, over the last year or two.
How does that translate to what you were seeing on the streets?
So Orange Sky, we provide free washing and showers to people that are on the streets, but now we've also seen in the last 2 years a lot more families using our services. So these are families that might have a roof over their heads, but just even if they can save $20 at the laundromat, that's $20 of food on the table, which is with the rising cost of living and housing and just in general people doing it tough. You never can take for granted how much just a little bit goes at the moment.
Aaron, when you talked in the survey about struggling to make ends meet, what does that mean for the people that you're talking to?
It's kind of like how I mentioned, it's just the simple things. Like it's families that have they might have lost a source of income, they might have less hours, and also with the raising costs, like it's no secret with the petrol rising and food. So again, if it's just the little things that that we're all doing it tough, I think is what we're realizing through these studies is that it's not just people on the streets that need that support to get food or to get housing or wants. It's all of us are feeling the pinch at the moment.
I think one of the things that stood out for me in your survey that 1 in 10 people have missed meals in the last year because they didn't have enough money to buy food.
Yeah, that's it. People are having to make the choices amongst the simple things that that we take for granted. So again, like I said, if we can save $20 at the laundromat, again that's going towards $20 of things of just basic survival needs that families have here.
Yeah, and hot showers too. Electricity costs a lot of money.
Yeah, that's it. And a big thing that we also provide is the conversations and a safe place for people to come and connect. And again, that's another thing is the loneliness that people have been experiencing since COVID and the disconnection. You might have heard the story of the lady that passed away in a car recently here in South Auckland, and it's just, we just hate to see people feeling disconnected. So we really want to, be out there in the community and give them some volunteers to come and connect to and come and have a chat while they wait for their washing.
So we're in the deepest, darkest, wettest days of winter at the moment, right? And I know you guys are fundraising for what you do with this challenge. It's called the Sudsy Challenge. Tell us what's the deal?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about the Sudsy Challenge. It's Orange Sky every year in September. It's our fundraising initiative to not only to raise funds, but also to raise awareness around homelessness. So what we do is the challenges, we give them a shirt where they can wear the same shirt for 3 days, and they can start to have conversations with the people in their circles, their family, their friends, and just to really, we want to break down the stigmas around homelessness, and the way they do that is just having those conversations. So if anyone's keen to join us in doing that and raising much needed funds, they can go to the sudsychallenge.co.nz to find out more.
So you supply the T-shirt, is it, Eddie, and they're supposed to wear the same clothes for 3 days? Yeah.
So the purpose is to wear the same clothes for 3 days. We also we'll provide them with a T-shirt that talks about it will have homelessness on the front, but it'll also say not changing clothes to change lives. And then it's just a really good conversation starter for people to have with their circles.
Because being able to change your clothes and have a shower and get clean, that kind of, I don't know, it's what makes you feel human, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can never take for granted how much people appreciate. There's people that have been on the streets, especially when we first started, that hadn't had showers in months. And I know for myself, honestly, if I haven't had a shower in a day or two, I'd be too embarrassed to go outside. And so, but the reality is that there's a lot of people that are missing out. And we have a few vans across New Zealand, but there's a lot of towns that, public amenities, there's not many options for guys to have showers.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Eddie. That's Eddie Winnie, who is from Orange Sky, Aotearoa's operations manager there. A new survey out, and again, as he said, they're fundraising for their mobile shower and laundry services. It is 21 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Just wondered if your kids or you were caught up in those threats today. Some schools were forced to evacuate or locked down. Police are investigating. Let us know what it was like where you were. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for us to get to the headlines now. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. At least a dozen schools have received bomb hoaxes today, and 4 were made yesterday. It's led to widespread disruption, with many of the targeted schools needing to evacuate. Assistant Police Commissioner Bruce O'Brien told Checkpoint the majority of calls were computer-generated voice calls. He says the police are working with schools to identify the origins of the calls and says the threat level is low. Auckland bus drivers are getting an 8% raise, taking their average pay to $25.62 an hour. But the Bus Drivers Union says they want to see it increase to at least $30 an hour. This comes as more than 1,000 buses are being cancelled every day due to a chronic staffing shortage. A cardiologist at Wellington Hospital fears patients could die on waiting lists as surgeries are delayed. The Cardiac Society is warning patients needing urgent procedures are now waiting much longer than normal, and some heart patients are waiting weeks in hospital for operations. The Ministry of Health is reporting 7,627 new community cases of COVID-19 today. 827 people are in hospital, 24 of whom are in intensive care. And China is warning of strong countermeasures if the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi goes ahead with a proposed visit to Taiwan in the coming weeks. Her travel plans are set to dominate a virtual meeting between US President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping today. That's our news headlines. If you've got any traffic to update, if you're out and about, please let us know. Text in. Back to you, Lisa, 5:23.
Thanks, Marama. Tom Walsh was brought to tears after being announced as one of the New Zealand flag bearers for tomorrow morning's opening ceremony at the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. Defending shot put champion Walsh and 6-time squash medalist Joelle King will lead the team. The first time a male and female athlete have jointly carried the New Zealand flag at the Commonwealth Games. Walsh told our reporter Bridget Tunnicliffe that he was a little surprised to be asked.
To be completely honest, it didn't really set in until I was standing up front there in front of everyone, in front of all of the athletes and support staff, and realising that for some reason Nigel decided to pick Joelle obviously, but myself in front of many other people who deserve the task and the job. And look, it's an incredibly special moment to do that and to be asked, and I got a little bit emotional around it too.
Were you able to tell anyone?
Yeah, look, Nigel gave me the hard word and said, look, keep it pretty close to your chest. But I told my girlfriend, my coach at the time, and my mental skills guy too, who they were all actually in the room with me when Nigel called. So it was, and then I told my parents about 2 weeks ago. So it was pretty cool for sure to surprise my parents with that. Yeah.
It was pretty cool when they showed the highlights clip with some of the past flag bearers as well. Yeah,
it was. Obviously, a lot of names on the list there, isn't there, of great athletes in New Zealand, and it's pretty cool to join them. As I said, it's a huge honour to somehow be named as one of the chosen ones.
I think I heard you saying that you've never actually been to an opening ceremony.
Yeah, well, I think both Joelle and myself haven't been to an opening or a closing ceremony. So, yeah, that kind of, hopefully we do it right. Hopefully Nigel's picked the right ones.
So, is that just because the schedules didn't really allow it to participate in those ceremonies?
Yeah, for sure. And I think generally for a ballistic sport like mine, an explosive sport like mine, standing 5 hours on your feet and walking around is not the greatest thing, so we always go to games to do the job first, and then if we can fit in things like the opening ceremony, closing ceremony, we do, and they just haven't lined up to date. But hey, if you're going to do it properly, and maybe this is the way to do it.
If you get a chance when you're walking around that perimeter and you look back and just have a glance at all the people that you're leading, I mean, that must fill you with a lot of inspiration. Yeah,
I think so. And that's, why I probably got a bit emotional up there, is because I have a huge respect for all the athletes and the work they put in. And it's a pretty special moment to be called by Nigel to be asked to fly the flag for New Zealand.
Tom Walsh talking to Bridget Tunnicliffe, and the opening ceremony starts at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. A multi-terrace housing development in Auckland's affluent eastern suburbs has hit the skids because it doesn't fit the leafy single-house character of the neighbourhood. The 17 dwellings planned for Roberta Avenue in Glendowie have been denied a resource consent by Auckland Council commissioners, even though council staff recommended it be greenlit and it was earlier given the go-ahead. On top of that, the government's ordered councils to allow higher density developments to help cut red tape and ease the housing crisis. A number of residents objected to the development because it was out of step with the area they describe as Beverly Hills. Well, joining us now is the agent for the development, Barfoot and Thompson's Paul Nesshausen. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Lisa. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. But hey, forget high-density housing. Have you got a problem in Glendowie with high-density NIMBYism?
Well, it's a challenge, all the new developments and the topology and, what we're used to versus what we're building and what we need to build need a bit of a mindset change. Single dwellings on full acre sections are being replaced by terrace housing, and a little bit for some people to get their head around.
Who can afford a house on a full acre in your neck of the woods?
Well, that's the challenge. That's the crisis that we're confronted with at the moment. There's a real estate crisis around availability and a crisis of affordability. I think we're in danger of pricing out a whole generation of buyers.
So we can get an idea, because I know there have been issues with kind of apartments that look like fridge boxes, right? Let's kind of set a benchmark, what we're talking about with these townhouses. Can you describe them in a sentence and what kind of value they were being marketed at?
A combination of 2 and 3 level terrace townhouses, so that means they're attached, around 90 square metres, and priced from 1.2 to 1.4 million.
Okay, so they're not dumps.
No. They were a well-known Kiwi developer, but not his first development. He normally does much more upmarket apartment dwellings, and designed by an architect, so it had really good architectural merit.
And they were landscaped. They were going to be landscaped, as I understand it, as well.
Yeah, that was all part of the site plan. So, in landscaping, parking, gardens, all looking wonderful when they're finished.
So, what is actually the problem here? Do people just not like cheaper houses going up around them?
Well, look, I think that's some of it. The communication during these developments is always a challenge. The first thing you hear about is when you see it listed on the market. And so there's a lot of suspicion about, who might buy them, how they might be built. And
when you say who might buy them, what? Do they not want families moving into the neighbourhood? People with young kids, professionals, first home buyers, do they not want them in the neighbourhood?
Yeah, and downsizers and all that sort of thing. But I think when, if your neighbour's one single house and their neighbour's one single house, and that's then going to become 17 townhouses, it sounds a little overwhelming, and one thinks of, noise and parking and, how's it all going to work? And that's the communication challenge.
So aren't we supposed to be building more houses, though? Are the rules too strict to get that done?
Look, I think there's a lot of ambiguity when dealing with, what should we say, the bureaucracy. I think developers are struggling with, what to build and where can they build it. And all the interactions with the bureaucracy, they're also ambiguous, and there's a lot of unknowns when you jump into these things. And the costs are arduous, like building consents and resource consents. Roberta was a good example, actually. 2 years in, and there's still no consent. So the holding costs for any developer are challenging.
Okay, so these were, this is a complicated story, but simply put, they did have the go-ahead and then all of a sudden they didn't, right? So presumably people have bought off plans, yes?
Yes.
Well, what happens to them? All their hopes and dreams and their new house. What happens?
Well, that's a good question. Look, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen next. That's up to the developer. I suspect he might have a couple of options up his sleeve and wish to pursue, but not looking at the brightest of options. But, yeah, all those people that have saved a deposit and paid and, waiting for their home to be built, it looks like at this stage that that's not going to happen.
Paul, I know obviously it's your job to sell real estate, so people would think you've got skin in the game. So I ask you this, would you have been happy if this development was going up on your street? Well, there's two answers to that. Am I happy with the physical appearance of 17 townhouses going up next door? That's one question. I think the other one is, the social structure of our society is somewhat dependent on those big answers to those big macro questions that are in real estate. Like, how do we make real estate more affordable? And how do we get our children into real estate? And so, if you look at it from that perspective, I think, I'm an advocate for more affordable housing. Appreciate your time, Paul. That's Paul Nesshausen from Barfoot and Thompson. It is 28 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e naine called Giles Beckford. Stop the presses, Giles. TY Point Aluminium Smelter wants to stay. Surprise, surprise. What are the chances of them getting a sweetheart deal?
Who would have thought that? They've been hinting at it, of course, for quite some time. They finally made the formal steps, so they're talking to Meridian, and I'm assuming Contact as well, about power supplies beyond the current contract, which ends in 2024. Now, it doesn't take too many guesses as to why they're wanting to now look like staying. First of all, aluminium prices have done very well in the past couple of years since the pandemic started. They're up around 40% or so. They have fallen quite a bit in recent months, but they're still well ahead of where they were quite some time ago, when aluminium smelters seemed to be perennially complaining about rock bottom global prices and how that imperiled the viability of the Tiwai Point smelter. The other point is that, of course, it's powered by renewable hydroelectricity, and that's increasingly an important issue with end users. Tiwai Point produces some of the most pure aluminium in the world. We're talking about not just cars, but we're talking about, in planes and, various devices. It's got a high reputation. It gets a bit of a premium because of that. And with green aluminium being, yet another cachet for people who will be buying the product, another reason to stay open. So it's going to be a long and tortuous road. Let's not be surprised if from time to time we hear the rattling of the corporate tin cup saying, "Buddy, can you spare me a dime?" But we hear quite clearly, and we heard from the head of Meridian earlier this year saying, no more cut price deals for them. So they might be facing sort of a significant lift in their energy costs. Certainly Meridian won't be selling to them below cost. We'll wait and see. There's a lot of kinks in this road to go. And as I say, I think that aluminium smelters, who are very adept at playing the lobbying game and taking it right to the brink, I think we'll see a repetition of those sort of tactics over the next couple of years.
A flood of greenwashers, Giles. Who's playing sheriff and what are they doing?
Greenwash, ESG, environmental, sustainability and governance, the three magic words of ethical investing, meant to drive us all out of fossil fuels and other nasty antisocial type commercial activities, such as making guns and bombs and tobacco and casinos and the like. You can slice and dice it in many ways. But it seems to be it's the new cachet for a fund manager to stand up and say, we offer you ESG, green ethical funding. And people go, well, that sounds nice. I'll put my money there, save the planet, do social good. It would seem, according to the Financial Markets Authority, that there's a good deal of a gap between what they say and what they actually do. It's called greenwashing. Green washes more profitably in the investment fund industry. The FMA says the definitions are vague. A lot of the investment funds can't thoroughly substantiate the claims that they make or the returns that they get. They blur the lines a little bit when it's a bit fuzzy. There might be a foot in this camp, but they've got a foot in the other camp as well. And by and large, investors don't really know they're being misled. So the Financial Markets Authority, it's a discussion document at the moment, but with it is the veiled warning: if you don't clean up your act, we'll come after you. The FMA has a tradition of going softly first, then it quietly raises the tempo. We hope that in a year's time or so, they might actually start to crack down and perhaps even get to the point, as they have done in Germany, where the police raided one of the biggest banks in the world for some of the false statements and misleading activities that they were doing in the environmental, sustainability and governance investment sector.
Giles, let's take a power walk around the markets.
We'll sprint today. Yesterday, our runner on the stock exchange track fell short by 100 metres. Today, the runner lapped the field twice. The strongest session in 6 weeks, 193-point gain. That's about 1.7%, back above the 11,300 level. Who's to know if it stays there, but obviously buoyed by what the Federal Reserve had to say this morning. New Zealand dollar 62.7 US cents, 89.7 Australian and 51.5 British pence.
Thanks, Giles. Ka kite. That's Giles Beckford joining us from our Wellington studio. Cafes are crying out for baristas as the industry faces thousands of vacancies around the country. And as Louise Tanuth reports, the worker shortage is causing owners to compete at unsustainable levels for staff.
You simply can't beat a barista-made coffee, but it's becoming harder to find someone to make one. Head to Trade Me and Seek and it's there for all to see. More than 2,300 barista vacancies around the country. Ken Shee owns Aoraki Coffee Roasters and Cafe in Hampton Downs and has been in the industry for over 12 years. He says it's never been harder to find a barista.
It's very difficult. it's a very difficult time. And I've been talking to all my friends who's running a business. They actually suffering by that every day.
In the meantime, Ken hops on the coffee machine himself or calls on his family to help him out. He counts himself lucky he can do this, but says it's not sustainable. He says Kiwis haven't been willing to move to the area or commute for work. Training staff takes time and money, with no guarantee they'll stay on. Ken thinks the pay is pretty competitive, so that staff can be retained.
For an average barista now, I think the average hour rate is around 25 to 30. Some busy cafe or some experienced barista, they'll be over 30 per hour.
That's echoed by owner of the Barista Academy NZ and cafe owner Rachel Berry. She says numbers in her courses have been shrinking.
There's definitely a shift in the quantity of applicants. There's definitely less people in the marketplace for people to be choosing from, which is predominantly the international cohort.
And that means most of her students are Kiwis, not looking for long-term work.
Kiwi churn in these roles has traditionally been very high. Auckland is horrific. I would say most cafe owners would be lucky to get 3 to 6 months out of a Kiwi staff member. Internationally, you'd get a year to 2 years depending on their work visa type.
She says despite wages going up over 60% in the last 3 years, employers have had to get competitive when looking for staff.
As they're trained up, they're literally getting picked up before they even finish their classes. It's actually harder to watch people poach staff. That's hard. There used to be a bit of an etiquette around that, and that's really sad.
President of the New Zealand Specialty Coffee Association, Ros Cartel, says most cafes and restaurants have been stretched thin.
People are sharing roles more than ever. We've got owners, of course, that may not have been as involved in the day-to-day running of the kitchen or on the espresso equipment. That's what's happening now, so we're all actually jumping in more than ever.
With the border fully reopening next week, they're crossing their fingers for both tourists and workers.
This could make us all busier, and it's fantastic, as long as we've got the people to support that business. So, we'll have students coming in, we'll have people that will be able to come and fill these jobs, hopefully.
A hope shared by plenty of cafes up and down the country.
It's 20 to 6, you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Mai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know your thoughts on higher density housing. How high density is too dense? 2101 on the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also interested if the queue at your coffee shop's got longer or whether they've changed their hours because they simply don't have enough baristas. Let us know too. And it is time to get to the headlines. Ane amarama mina pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. At least a dozen schools have received bomb hoaxes today and 4 were made yesterday. Principals Federation President Cherie Taylor Patel says the hoaxes are distressing for those affected. Police Assistant Commissioner Bruce O'Brien has told Checkpoint police believe the calls are coming from the same person. An Auckland bus driver says the increase in pay isn't what they expected and says wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living. Drivers in Auckland are getting an 8% raise, taking their average pay to $25.62 an hour. Some Otago farmers may have weeks or even months of repair work ahead following this week's floods. Palmerston farmer Ron Sheets says roughly a third of his property was underwater yesterday. He says the floodwaters have now receded, leaving behind ponding, damaged fences and debris. The number of teens leaving school early and leaving with no qualifications increased last year. Education Ministry figures show almost 13% of leavers did not have at least level 1 of the national NCEA qualification. The drop in achievement was worst for Māori students, with 1 in 4 leaving without any NCEA qualifications. And nominations for the Green Party's vacant co-leadership position have now opened after James Shaw was ousted from the position by a small number of delegates at the party's annual general meeting last weekend. That's your news headlines. I'll be back with more news at 6. It's 5:43.
Kia ora rā e ho. Some Otago farmers are preparing for weeks, if not months, of repairs in the wake of this week's floods. For some areas, much of the water has receded, leaving behind debris and damaged fences. Tess Brunton reports from Palmerston.
This isn't the biggest flood Ron Sheet has seen at his Palmerston farm, but he says it's come very close.
At least 30% of it went under. It could have even been 40%, but it just varies on the height of it. Some of it was only under by a few hundred mils, other places by 2.5 to 3 metres.
He's grateful for the early weather warning as it gave him time to move stock to higher ground and wind up electrical fences. The Shag River snakes its way through his property and is a couple of minutes' walk from his house. He says it's a tame little river compared to what it was yesterday afternoon.
Yesterday it was about 2.5 metres higher than where it is at the moment. You can see the tide mark by looking at the fence lines where all the grass and rubbish is onto them, and some of the fences have been knocked off the posts as well.
With yesterday's flooding reduced to ponding, debris and mud, it's time for the clean-up.
Putting some of the fences back up and things like that. Like we've been out this morning, we've got all the stock back onto the fodder beet and the kale and everything. But it's just, you tack the fences back up and then just fix them when you can. Yeah, it's a job that we'll most likely be still doing in a few months' time. The other issue you have is that you have the rubbish all over your paddocks. Someone else's trees and someone else's stumps and stuff like that.
Shelley Mears from Otago Fresh Milk is one of his neighbours and moved some of her dry cows onto his property to keep them safe during the floods.
We were already at capacity from the rain event 2 weeks ago, so soil capacity was already sort of right up there. And so the rain that we've had over the last 2 days just came down and it just flowed straight across the top of the paddock.
It's a completely different scene less than 24 hours later.
Our neighbour in particular was showing a lot of water on his paddocks yesterday. Paddocks that I could see that were completely covered in water yesterday have just got some ponding on them today. So it's quite a very different picture very quickly, which is such a relief for everybody to get that water away quickly.
She's relieved the rain didn't arrive next month.
Luckily for us, it's come before we start calving, so our spring calving doesn't start for another 10 days, and we're hoping that our paddocks that we intend to calve the cows on will dry out a little bit before then.
Other farmers RNZ contacted were flat out with repairs. Further north near Herbert, sheep and beef farmer Ross Monroe Hay is the meat and wool chair for the local federated farmers. He says the flooding didn't cause much damage on his property and his stock are fine. Some of the local dairy farms have started calving.
It's not nice having to sort of calve in the wet weather, but for the sheep and beef world around here, they haven't really started lambing as such, so that way it is relatively quite lucky that this has sort of been when it has, quite timely, so hopefully it can dry it a wee bit before then and make it a wee bit easier.
Up in Christchurch, Hillmorton High School was closed earlier this week due to heavy flooding. Principal Anne Brokenshire says students were welcome back yesterday, but encouraged to ditch sneakers for gumboots and wear whatever they need to keep themselves warm.
Always the few that think that it's cool to wear your pyjamas to school, which doesn't go down well here. But yeah, I had lots of conversations with students about their gumboots. They were great about it, really good. And most of the staff were wearing gumboots as well, so it was just a bit of fun to a really dreary couple of days, really.
After a soggy couple of weeks, many are hoping a few days of sunshine aren't too far away.
A cardiac surgeon fears patients will die on waiting lists as operations continue to be delayed. The Cardiac Society says patients needing urgent procedures are now waiting much longer than normal. Brain and cancer surgeries are also being delayed as the winter pressure on hospitals continues. Anei te kairi poata, a Rosie Gordon.
Scott Harding is a cardiologist at Wellington Hospital, but he's finding it hard to do his job. Pressure on hospitals means surgeries are being cancelled and pushed back. The Cardiac Society says that now includes urgent procedures too, with patients waiting much longer than normal. That has Dr Harding worried.
It is concerning. I think it's concerning to all cardiologists. This is not just a Wellington problem, it's a national problem at the moment. What we want to do is try and address this or have some mechanism for addressing it before, people start having adverse events on the waiting list.
Do you mean a heart attack?
Well, it can be a heart attack, it can be death, it can be developing heart failure.
So you're worried that people might die on the waiting list?
That's certainly a possibility.
But Dr Harding says there's little more hospital staff can do. Heart patients needing an intensive care bed after surgery can't get one, with ICU clogged with patients and hampered by staff shortages.
they can't just magically invent beds. This is a difficult situation for everyone involved. It's not because any one person is not working or trying to solve the problem.
The Cancer Society is hearing about urgent procedures being cancelled too, typically at regional hospitals. Here's Chief Executive Lucy Elwood.
There are some on the day when there'll just be that the nursing staff or anaesthetist or surgeon is now in isolation and there's actually no way for the hospital to then staff that surgery. So, you maybe only have 1 to 2 specialists that are performing some of these surgeries and that can be stressful for patients, particularly if they've travelled for that surgery. They'll have to travel back home and wait for another appointment.
But for every surgery that is time critical, there are dozens of patients waiting for care that is classed as non-urgent. Brain Tumour Support NZ Chairman Chris Tees says hundreds are experiencing delays accessing surgery and scans, with some unable to even make appointments. MRI delays are the worst he's ever seen them.
People aren't actually getting answers from their doctors and can't even contact the neurosurgeon. And we have a lot of patients who are on active surveillance and they are meant to have regular MRI scans. And if these are being delayed, there's a risk that their treatment will also be delayed.
That includes patients like Caitlin, which is not her real name. At just 32 years old, she's showing signs a brain tumour removed last year is coming back. But an MRI to monitor for resurgence was cancelled last month. She has no idea when it will be rescheduled.
I've had quite severe migraines, so about 4 a week, and vomiting. You live with quite a bit of anxiety and, you try to keep busy. It does seem unfair.
Wellington cardiologist Scott Harding wants Health NZ to come up with an urgent solution to surgery delays.
It needs to be recognised as an issue, and then there has to be a plan formulated to deal with it.
Te Whatu Ora, the new health authority, says it's monitoring the impact of pressure on planned care and is working to ensure there is minimal impact on cardiac surgery. It says any decisions to defer cardiac surgery are made with clinical teams and patient safety is carefully considered. Te Whatu Ora is developing a plan to improve access to planned care services and reduce waiting lists once the burden of COVID-19 on the health system starts to decrease. It is 10 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's remarkable for a few reasons. 2 lucky climbers have been rescued on Double Cone in the Remarkable Ranges after narrowly dodging an avalanche and having to dig themselves into a snow cave to make it through the night after the search team couldn't immediately get to them. Russ Tilsley from Wakatipu Alpine Cliff Rescue explains the pair had been climbing a few days, then on Tuesday things turned bad fast.
They're basically in a whiteout and blizzard conditions. They went into some terrain and with all the new snow, they sort of triggered off and got caught in an avalanche. And, I suppose for their perspective that, they were quite lucky. It turned out to be, a good class 2, 2.5 sort of size avalanche, which is big enough to bury someone. They sort of went for a bit of a ride for about 20 metres and weren't too buried, managed to pick themselves up out of it. And at that stage made a decision to basically try and retrace their steps and get back to where they'd spent the night, which was in, a relatively a safe spot.
That sounds really scary, Russ.
Oh, for them, I think it was, and then they made a great decision then to, initiate a call to the police and say, hey, look, we can't get out of here. And there was no way out of there, really. That every route out was through steep avalanche terrain. From where they were, basically, if you look up at the Remarkables from Queenstown, they basically where they'd camped the last night, they'd been out for 3 nights, is basically right on the edge of the Remarkables down sort of towards the southern end. And so they had good cell phone coverage. They did have a beacon as well, so they had good safety equipment. But really, when you can talk to someone firsthand instead of going through a beacon, and they did set the beacon off. The police told them to set the beacon off at some stage.
They are in a situation where they can't get out without help. And I know you made, a couple attempts to get in there by helicopter, but the weather was so flippin' terrible you couldn't do it. So at that point, what was the option? What advice did you give them?
The guys are in good spirits. They're in a relatively, a good, safe spot. They had a nice big, they were sheltering in a big wind scoop behind a huge boulder. And they dug a little snow cave. We said, look, if we can't get into you, your options are you're going to have to stay the night. Look, they were quite happy to do that. They had good food. They were a little bit shaken up from their experiences earlier in the day, but pretty pragmatic sort of young sort of guys. Made a good decision, and we just said, hey, look, we called them at 6 o'clock, said we can't get in. They were quite happy to hunker down for the evening. Really, if you dig a good snow cave, it's warmer than a tent, and they're pretty comfortable.
How do you dig a good snow cave, Russ?
It takes a little bit of work, a lot of sweat. If you've got a big bank you can dig into, which is, luckily it was a big sort of scoop of snow behind this big boulder, which they managed to sort of dig out a cave, and you basically block out up the entrance and make a little hole underneath and sort of crawl through, and it sort of makes it nice and snug. So it's not really like a cave as you and I would think of it with a big open entrance. It's once you sort of, cover up your entrance and dig another hole in the bottom and crawl through and up into it, you're really quite comfy and relatively comfy, can be outside into the elements of, a blizzard, I suppose. So we called them up the next morning and sort of did a weather check, and the weather was pretty much the same. The wind had sort of dropped back a little bit. And then we decided, well, we'll go and give it another attempt, which we were coming back around from behind them and from behind the Remarkables and not sort of up the front face. And we couldn't get in, but the pilot...
rough as guts, was it, Russ, in a helicopter?
Yeah, look, you're getting buffeted around, it's sort of blowing about 40 knots in a blizzard, it's a whiteout. And luckily we've got, we had a great pilot in Nick Nicholson from Heliworks in Queenstown, and he got 3 guys. We decided if we could get up to a certain point, which was a safe area we could get these guys into, then we'd drop them off, and Nick managed to get them up to a point sort of probably about 1.2k away and about 300 vertical metres below them, and the boys just climbed up through them and got to them sort of about 11:30 midday. Just after that, we were lucky we got a little bit of a clearance, and we managed to get the chopper in and pick all of them up in one go. And then, really it's only, 5-minute flight back down to Queenstown, really, so quite close.
And that was Russ Tilsley. Do check out the video from the chopper and some of the photos. They'll be on our web page. Plans to build the Riverside Conference Centre in Whangarei are no longer dead in the water. Last year, the council refused to help pay for the Oruku Landing project, originally pitched by private developers. The designs have been scaled back, and today the council agreed to put the money in. Sam Ollie was at the hui.
The motion is carried.
Oruku Landing supporters jubilant over the Whangarei District Council's decision to give $3 million for footpaths, stormwater and traffic upgrades. That's far less than the $70 million sought from the council last year, but now the designs are downsized. Developers, the Prosper Northland Trust, say the smaller council allocation will be enough help. Trustee Ian Reeves says the centre will stimulate other builds developers want to add on, including a 4-star hotel.
It will lead on to provision of a hotel, which is very necessary and been acknowledged for years and years in Whangarei as necessary, and also further apartment developments.
More than 5,000 people submitted their views of the proposals last year. Nearly 80% were against the old version. When the council rejected the project, Whangarei MP Emily Henderson said it was, quote, very disappointing. Northlander and former Deputy PM Winston Peters told RNZ Whangarei was looking a gift horse in the mouth. $59 million in government funding for the project was about to go back to the Crown Infrastructure Partners pool, but Oruku campaigners asked for the money to stay ring-fenced while they revised plans. Councillor Vince Kokorulo complimented their stickability today.
We all thought the project was completely dead. We thought the government had turned around and said, right, the Whangarei District Council doesn't want it, therefore it's not going to happen. But they have kept it alive. They've managed to keep the communications going.
but the councillors' vote was not unanimous. Tricia Cutforth chose to abstain and Simon Reid was against, saying it was unfair for some building projects to have infrastructure costs cut and others not.
Our ratepayers have clearly told me, or the ones that have contacted me, that they have not had any help in the development.
The scaled-down conference centre design has 850 seats and the floor area is 40% smaller, theatre capacity is gone and the building height is reduced. The plans also include a marina and ferry terminal on the Hatia riverfront. The overall project budget is $90 million. The Prosper Northland Trust says the centre will generate $40 million in visitor spending in the first 5 years.
Let's get to some of your feedback now on the Glendowie housing project. Mixed reviews on this one. One listener says they look like rows of filing cabinets and post office boxes. Dan says infill housing, the irony to think our forebears left their countries to get away from this type of housing. Another person says it's disgusting though for the development to be stopped. It's okay for Glen Eden or Tahuhu, but not for Glendowie. Money talks, total snobbery. Another suggestion from one listener says, can we not introduce a NIMBY tax, but call it a twat tax? And that can be for all the dickheads, the selfish dickheads who won't allow these sites to be used for terraced housing. On the subjects of baristas, someone says, as someone who spends a lot of my 20s in retail and hospital, no sympathy for cafe owners.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. A string of threats that forced more than a dozen schools to evacuate this afternoon may have come from overseas. Police say the actual risk to schools is low and the calls are likely to be hoaxes. Assistant Commissioner Bruce O'Brien has told Checkpoint it's similar to a previous incident.
I can't be 100% certain that they are originating from offshore, but we are looking into that. We did have an incident back in 2017 where we had a number of schools suffer a similar threat, and the perpetrator for that was based offshore, and they were held to account because we work with our international partners on this.
Bruce O'Brien says the majority of calls were bomb threats. Schools in Masterton, Kaikoura, Greymouth, Queenstown, Levin, Whanganui, Rolleston, Takaka, Geraldine, Dunstan, Ashburton and Palmerston North all received calls. 4 threats were also made yesterday. A cardiologist at Wellington Hospital fears patients could die on waiting lists as surgeries are delayed. The Cardiac Society is warning patients needing urgent procedures are now waiting much longer than normal. It says some heart patients are waiting weeks in hospital for operations. Wellington cardiologist and Cardiac Society spokesperson Dr Scott Harding says there could be dire consequences around the country. Te Whatu Ora, the new health authority, says it's monitoring pressure on the health system and is working to ensure there is minimal impact on cardiac surgery. An Auckland bus driver says the increase in pay isn't what they expected. Drivers in Auckland are getting an 8% raise, taking their average pay to $25.62 an hour. One driver says wages weren't keeping up with the cost of living.
The more passenger we got, the more responsibility we have. And we're not paying enough for the living cost or the pay increase of the staff, petrol and stuff like that.
The bus driver told RNZ his colleagues in Wellington are already being paid $27 an hour. More than 1,000 buses are being cancelled in Auckland every day due to chronic staff shortages. Mayor Phil Goff says the fleet is already 270 drivers short. Some Otago farmers may have weeks or even months of repair work ahead following this week's floods. Palmerston farmer Ron Sheet says roughly a third of his property was underwater yesterday to depths of up to 3 metres. He says the floodwaters have now receded, leaving behind ponding, damaged fences and debris.
We've been out this morning, we've got all the stock back onto the fodder beat and the kale and everything, but it's just you tack the fences back up and then just fix them when you can. Yeah, it's a job that we'll most likely be still doing in a few months' time. The other issue you have is that you have the rubbish all over your paddocks. Someone else's trees and someone else's stumps and stuff like that.
Ron Sheet says the early weather warning systems make a big difference. Rotorua Lakes Council says it will chase a man for costs over court action involving its controversial Māori ward proposals. Robert Lee filed a judicial review in April but has now withdrawn it. Mr Lee claimed the council predetermined the outcome of a representation review. The council paused a proposal to change electoral rules to give those on the Māori roll and general roll an equal say in electing councillors. It incurred costs of more than $100,000 responding to Mr Lee and says it will pursue him for at least a portion of that. There will be a Māori ward with 3 elected members for this year's local body elections. Australian Treasurer Jim Chalmers has delivered a grim forecast for the national economy and federal budget. He warns inflation will worsen before it gets better. Here's the ABC's Tim Lowry from Canberra.
The Treasurer came to Parliament with bad news. Inflation is expected to peak at 7.75% later this year, up from its current 6.1%. It will moderate next year, then fall back to normal levels the year after. Jim Chalmers says wages will start to climb, but real wages growth is at least a couple of years away.
The harsh truth is that households won't feel the benefits of higher wages while inflation eats up these wage increases and then some.
Economic growth is slowing too, with forecasts broadly revised down.
Nominations for the Green Party's vacant co-leadership position have now opened. James Shaw was ousted from the position by a small number of delegates at the party's annual general meeting last weekend. An email to Green Party members, seen by RNZ, says nominations will be open until next Thursday. Mr Shaw is the confirmed contender so far, but his caucus colleague, Tiano Tuiono, is considering running for the position. China is warning of strong countermeasures if the US House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, goes ahead with a proposed visit to Taiwan in the coming weeks. Her travel plans are set to dominate a virtual meeting between US President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping later today. Richard Kimber reports from Hong Kong.
Beijing says a Taiwan visit by Nancy Pelosi as part of a broader trip to Asia in the coming weeks would be highly provocative. It regards Taiwan as part of China's sovereign territory and hasn't ruled out taking it over by force in order to reunify it with the Chinese mainland. The White House has not confirmed Pelosi's travel itinerary, but reports say US defense officials are making security arrangements for a potential Taiwan visit. The controversy over a potential Pelosi visit is expected to add further tension to a virtual meeting expected to happen between President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Thursday.
Back home, plans to build an 850-seat Riverside Conference Centre in Whangarei have been revived. Last year, the council refused to help pay for the Oruku landing project, originally pitched by private developers. The government had committed $59 million in funding. The designs have since been scaled back, and today the council agreed to give $3 million for footpaths, stormwater and traffic upgrades. The Prosper Northland Trust says the centre will spur $40 million in visitor spending in the first 5 years. It's 6:06. Manly has banned its 7 boycotting players from their home stadium for tonight's NRL match against Sydney Roosters over safety concerns. The 7 decided to stand down rather than play in a jersey symbolising inclusiveness, drawing criticism from LGBTQ groups and the club's first openly gay player, Ian Roberts. They opposed wearing the jersey on religious and cultural grounds. Police have told Manly officials the players' presence at Brookvale Oval could pose a safety risk. Roosters coach Trent Robinson maintains the players' stance is unacceptable.
This is not about rugby league. This is a societal issue. If someone said they weren't going to wear the Indigenous jersey, there'd be an outcry. 40 years ago, that would have been the case. 80 years ago, we wouldn't have had women in league round. We've moved on those fronts. We haven't moved on this.
Tom Walsh was brought to tears after being named as one of the New Zealand flag bearers for tomorrow morning's opening ceremony at the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. The defending shot put champion and 6-time squash medalist Joel King will lead the team, the first time a male and female athlete have jointly carried the New Zealand flag at the Commonwealth Games.
It didn't really set in until I was standing up front there in front of everyone, realising that for some reason Nigel decided to pick Joelle obviously, but myself in front of many other people who deserve the task. Incredibly special moment, and I got a little bit emotional around it too.
And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Things Made of Mud, Unitec's Richard Fahey continues the story of New Zealand ceramics. Claire Kincannon meets the microbes thriving in some of the Earth's harshest environments. Motoko Kakubayashi is on the line from Japan. And digital native Charlie Cuff on using non-fungible tokens, those certificates of ownership of things digital, to verify ownership of things in the real world. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National, on air, online and on demand. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint back in a minute. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Showers with thunderstorms possible until early tomorrow morning. Showers clearing for Bay of Plenty by tomorrow afternoon and easing elsewhere. Rain developing from Taranaki to Wellington tomorrow evening. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers, mainly about the ranges. Fine tomorrow. Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson showers, clearing early tomorrow morning, but returning to Nelson, Marlborough tomorrow evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland showers, possibly heavy in the north, turning to rain for a time tomorrow morning and afternoon. For Canterbury, scattered rain, fine spells for tomorrow and isolated evening showers. North and central Otago and Dunedin, patchy rain or drizzled for today, fine spells tomorrow with a few showers from the afternoon. For Clutha and Southland, rain or drizzle today with showers tomorrow, and for the Chatham Islands, cloudy with showers. It's 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Marama. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Texas governor has announced Uvalde schools will receive over $1 million in funding for counselling and the care of students following the massacre at Robb Elementary School. 2 months on, the community is still waiting for answers, with families of the 21 students and teachers killed calling for the school itself to be held accountable. CNN's Rosa Flores sat down for this exclusive interview with Robb Elementary School principal Mandy Gutierrez.
When I was calling Chief Arredondo, I heard 3 shots. The initial 3 shots.
The principal of Robb Elementary School in Uvalde breaking her silence and answering questions about allegations of lax security at the school.
I believe that I did my job to the best of my abilities.
While law enforcement's handling of that ill-fated day has seen the most scrutiny up to now, the families of the victims.
Y'all do not give a damn about our children or us.
Turning their calls for accountability towards the school administration, including the principal who says she was suspended with pay this week pending a performance review relating to campus security. Last school year was her first year as principal.
Starting at that school, at Robb, that principal needs to be gone. All of the school board needs to be gone.
I believe they're entitled to their opinion. I followed the training that I was provided with to the best of my abilities.
The Texas House Investigative Committee report revealed that Robb Elementary had a culture of non-compliance with safety policies, requiring doors to be kept locked, which turned out to be fatal. Gutierrez responding to that criticism.
Was there a culture of non-compliance at Robb Elementary?
Absolutely not. Anytime that an alert went out, every single teacher on that campus took it to mean it could be a potential escalating situation. And so everybody follows protocol.
So you disagree with the findings of the Texas House Investigative Report?
I disagree.
According to the Texas House Investigative Report, a coach that was somewhere on school property saw the gunman jump this fence. She used her radio to report it. The principal heard the call and tried to initiate a lockdown using a software application, but the Wi-Fi was bad and she did not use the school intercom.
It could potentially magnify a situation.
That's the door that the gunman used to enter the school. According to the report, the door was unlocked. Had the door been locked, as the policy required, it would have likely slowed down the gunman. Instead, surveillance video showed the gunman walked into the building through an unlocked door.
Why was that door unlocked that day?
I am not sure why that door was unlocked.
So that door was normally locked during the day?
Always locked.
Always?
Yes.
Then walked into a classroom. The report also states that the principal, teachers, and even many fourth grade students widely knew of the problem with the lock to room 111. But no one placed a work order to repair the lock. Not the principal, not anyone else. Gutierrez disputes that account.
What I know for a fact is that the door to room 111 did in fact lock.
It did.
The teacher has to use the key to enter.
So somehow the report says that it was likely unlocked. So somehow it could have been unlocked on that day.
It's possible.
Some of the families of the victims say any safety lapses were inexcusable.
What would you tell her?
You failed our children. You failed our children.
I am very close to my staff and my students and many of their families. It is an unimaginable pain to know that we don't have those individuals with us anymore and that there's families that are missing their loved ones every single day.
Staying in the US, interest rate hikes are adding to the burden on struggling Americans. The US Federal Reserve has enacted its second consecutive 0.75 percentage point interest rate increase. One non-profit organisation says it's received nearly double the amount of calls from people asking for help. CNN's Gabe Collins talked to people about the serious impact the rate hikes are having on their lives.
Thanks to interest rates, Sephora Miles is house hunting in D.C. with deflated expectations.
I started looking at houses in the 500s, 550 range, and ended up coming down to about 384, maybe 450 as like a hard stop.
Because of mortgage rates?
Just because of the mortgage rates, yeah.
Mortgage payments on a typical U.S. home are up 62% in a year, costing Americans hundreds of dollars more each month. And they'll likely keep rising as the Federal Reserve raises interest rates.
Some people say they want to wait till the record's just done.
I don't want to have this large interest rate looming over me.
The Fed's latest rate hike could drive up the cost of car loans and credit card debt too. Americans owed $840 billion in outstanding credit at the start of 2022.
It sneaks up on you.
Gary Herman runs Consolidated Credit Solutions, a nonprofit that helps people solve debt problems.
We have seen a dramatic increase, almost double the number of new people calling our office looking for help with credit card debt, and that's just been in the past 2 months.
The Fed's rate hike aims to cool this 40-year high inflation.
We're trying to do just the right amount, right? We're not trying to have a recession.
But in the short term, it's one more strain on Americans.
We're in a really crazy time right now.
Consumer confidence is down for the third straight month. And according to one poll, 65% of American voters think we're already in a recession.
I've noticed gas has gone down, but groceries still have not gone down. Fruits, vegetables keep going up. So I'm pretty concerned.
Nicholas Godfrey keeps tightening his budget in Atlanta.
We're having to cut back a lot right now just to get by.
In a survey by Morgan Stanley, 2/3 of U.S. consumers say they're planning to reduce spending in the next 6 months, especially on big ticket items like home appliances and cars. Rob Shane's clunker has no air conditioning and a violent shake, needing $7,000 of repairs.
Well, the mechanic told us we shouldn't drive it any further than we're comfortable walking home.
Why haven't you bought a new car?
Can't afford it. Plain and simple. I mean, we can't afford it. Prices are too high. Interest rates are too high.
But now his wife is pregnant. Would you put your baby in this car?
Absolutely not. I wouldn't put my baby in this car.
So outrunning the market may prove impossible.
So we just want a safe family car that can get us around town. When is this going to kind of come back to earth?
It's 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Efforts are underway to restart blockaded grain exports from Ukraine and prevent a global food crisis. In Turkey, a coordination centre has begun work as part of a complex deal to get grain out of Ukrainian Black Sea ports. The aim is to export 5 million tonnes of grain a month, which was the figure before Russia invaded Ukraine in February. The BBC's Richard Alpine reports.
From the start of the war back in February, Russian forces have been blockading Ukraine's Black Sea ports, preventing the exports of Ukrainian wheat and other grains, vital for the food supplies of many countries around the world. According to officials, there are around 20 million tons of grain in Ukraine. With fears growing of global food shortages, it seems there may now have been a breakthrough with a deal agreed by the two sides. It's hoped it will be possible for ships to be inspected near Turkey and then guided past Ukrainian sea mines before being loaded with grains and fertilizer. The first shipments are due in the coming days. All this after Turkey's defence minister, Hulusi Akar, unveiled a coordination centre in Istanbul to oversee the export of Ukrainian grains.
Currently, the preparation and planning is continuing for the ships laden with grain that will leave Ukrainian ports. The work done by Joint Coordination Centre will contribute to overcoming the food crisis affecting the whole world.
The UN, Ukraine and Russia have all said they expect exports to begin in a few days. But Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko has warned the deal could collapse if obstacles to Russia's agricultural exports are not promptly removed.
Firefighters have finally started to control wildfires in California after thousands of people had to leave their homes. Officials say the fires have behaved unlike any others they've seen. The BBC's James Clayton returned with one family to see if there was anything left.
This was the Martinez family's favourite place in the world. They called it Shangri-La. Their home has now been obliterated. Aaron has returned to assess the damage.
This is my house. This is where I felt the safest. This is where my office was, my television, my computer, books, and binders. There's just nothing. It's a picture frame. There's a glass frame. Had family pictures in it. It's all the stuff that can't be replaced. It hurts. Grandmother's writing. Pictures. Oh God. Even the old answering machines that we saved, that we stopped using just so we could hear grandparents' voices. Yeah, that's a bad one. It's all gone.
Aaron's wife Heather is trying to look for the family cats.
I don't see anything.
Yeah, I'm trying to hear more than see.
They had 15 of them, but none of them respond to the calls.
Looks like it was one of the teenage ones, or the teenage to adult. Poor thing.
Her son Austin finds one of the kittens. It didn't make it.
I've never experienced anything like this ever in my life, ever.
The grief is overwhelming for Aaron, but the family knew living here was becoming increasingly risky.
The climate here, you've lived here all your life. Have you noticed that change?
It has gotten a lot hotter and a lot drier. A lot of people we've talked to were like, should we try to rebuild? Should we stay? And they say, we're selling. We're getting out of here.
The Martinez family didn't have insurance. They didn't just lose memories, they lost everything.
We're going to rebuild, and we'll be stronger and smarter. But this loss hurts. It hurts a lot.
What happened to the Martinez family is a danger more and more Californians are facing as it gets drier and drier.
The Commonwealth Games, which open in Birmingham tomorrow, are the biggest sporting event to be staged in the UK since the Olympics 10 years ago. There are hopes it will provide a major economic boost to the city of Birmingham and the surrounding region. The BBC's Joe Linsky reports.
Birmingham has built just one new venue for these Commonwealth Games, and it's here in Sandwell, one of the most diverse and densely populated parts of the city. This place has never had a resource like this before, but now it's got an aquatic centre.
It is a very, very diverse community and it's got a growing economy, but there are still quite high levels of deprivation in the area, and we're quite keen to use the Games as a springboard to create opportunities and invite investment into the area too.
The centre's been stitched into Smethwick in Sandwell Borough. By next year, it'll be a multi-purpose facility. For this community, it's a gateway to sport that without the Games wouldn't be here.
I feel extremely lucky because I don't think it would just affect us, it would affect future generations. In 20 years' time, we'd be like, yeah, I was there, I saw this happen.
It's really an amazing opportunity for us. There are a variety of sports, there's always something we can do, and it's going to be an amazing experience for us.
I joined Smethwick Swimming Club when I was 11. We were fortunate to have pools close by, but nothing like we're going to have now. We've talked about this for a long time, we've dreamed about it, and it's real now, and it's just going to give so many opportunities for youngsters from around here.
So as someone that's been involved in Smethwick swimming for so long, what does it mean to you to have this venue at these Commonwealth Games?
I'm speechless. It just is so amazing, and the fact that this event is going to come to Smethwick and people all around the world are going to be watching, it's just so amazing. It's usually something that happens somewhere else.
Birmingham is the brand, but this is a Games across the whole of the West Midlands, particularly there in Smethwick, one of the toughest communities really in the whole of the West Midlands, if not the whole of the UK. And the fact that they are getting something which is world class and will be there as a facility for the community forever in the future is a brilliant example of real legacy.
Birmingham's only new facility's been built with place in mind. The council says it can keep sport here affordable. The pool at these Games is made not just for medals, but for a neighbourhood.
After 37 drama-filled years and almost 9,000 episodes, Australia's favourite soap opera, Neighbours, will air its final episode tonight. It launched the careers of stars like Russell Crowe, Guy Pearce, the Hemsworth brothers, Kylie Minogue, Jason Donovan and Margot Robbie. And for a long time, it had audiences around the world glued to their screens, but not anymore. As the ABC's Stephanie Smale reports, the streetlights are out on Ramsay Street.
With lines like this delivered by a fresh-faced Guy Pearce, it's no surprise audiences were hooked and held on for decades.
Well, like I said, I went to Canberra, met this girl, I fell in love with her. How else can I say it?
Just like that?
Yeah. Sorry.
That's when good... Neighbours holds the title of the world's 7th longest-running drama series with 63 weddings, 20 births and 68 deaths. Harold! Over the decades, character favourites have gone missing and turned up again. Harold! And long-standing couples like Dr. Carl and his wife Susan have been on the ropes.
Isabel is having a baby, and I am the father.
From now on, Carl, expect nothing from me but hatred. I hate you.
Ryan Maloney has played the character of Jared Rebecki, or Toadie, since 1995.
Friends and family, may I present Mr. and Mrs. Jared Rebecki.
His on-screen persona has been blown up, paralysed, married, widowed and divorced. He's told ABC Local Radio about his favourite episode.
The 6,000 episode where Toadie has to have a nude lunch to impress some clients. And Dr. Carl's lost a winning scratchy at Toadie's house. And in order to come in and find that scratchy, he has to strip off. So just the lasting memory of Alan Fletcher wandering around my house nude.
He says it's sad seeing the end of a show that's launched the career of so many actors, writers, directors and producers.
They actually did like this kind of fly-through on a drone through all of the studios and all of the sets, and they were all completely empty. And it was just so incredibly sad because, you know, those rooms and those sets were filled with so many people and so many relationships and so much joy. And you know, we all worked incredibly hard to bring something into this world.
So why is a show that still has millions of viewers each episode about to roll credits for the last time? Queensland University of Technology Media and Communication lecturer Dr. Jason Sternberg says Neighbours has been caught caught in a perfect storm, with pandemic budget challenges, local content quota changes and a shift towards big budget shows. He's worried about the loss of the show for up-and-coming television talent on and off the screen.
I think there's cause for concern any time a locally made TV show that employs 200 people gets axed. And that's speaking as someone who teaches students who want to enter the Australian film and television industry. And I know, a lot of listeners and a lot of other people would not call Neighbours quality television in the same way we might talk about a prestige, shorter run drama, say. But what Neighbours does is that it provides training for people in the industry. And they learn it under a baptism of fire, because when you work on a soap opera, you work long hours, you work hard and get an understanding of what it is like to make television. And that's why so many people from Neighbours have graduated and gone on to very, very successful careers in not only local in the Australian film and television industry, but internationally. I think we are seeing a trend towards, at the moment at least, a trend towards more big budget prestige dramas. That will help the industry. But in terms of providing hands-on, busy and engaged training ground, the loss of Neighbours is a sad thing.
Oscar nominee Margot Robbie is expected to join a long list of stars returning for the final episode.
Bye-bye to Neighbours. And last bit of feedback from JD from Opotiki. He's got in touch about the rescue on the Remarkables. Imagine it, he says, you've just dug yourself out from an avalanche successfully. You then dig a snow cave to spend the night in under the snow. Not for me, says JD. Not for me either, JD. It makes my bones shiver thinking about it. That's all we've got time for. The Late News team is going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you want to catch up on anything from Checkpoint, you can find us on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First Up speaks to Predator-Free Wellington about why there has been a whopping 550% rise in the pea waka waka population. I love myself a fantail. They're the cutest birds. Kei te hoki mai anō a pōpō whānau pō Mārie. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News Headlines. I'm Catriona McLeod. Assistant Police Commissioner Bruce O'Brien says a string of threats that forced more than a dozen schools to evacuate this afternoon may have come from overseas. The Cardiac Society is warning patients needing urgent procedures are now waiting much longer than normal, and there are fears patients could die on waiting lists as surgeries are delayed. And the Australian Treasurer has delivered a grim forecast for the national economy and federal budget, warning inflation will worsen before it gets better. More details in the news at 7.
This week on Music 101, we announce the finalists for the 2022 New Zealand Jazz Awards. I talk with UK artist Joy Crooks about her Mercury Prize nominated album. And producer Has Beats from Team Dynamite is our guest on the mixtape, ahead of the Pacific Music Awards. Music 101, this Saturday with me, Charlotte Ryan, from 1pm here on RNZ National.
Kia ora, Charlotte. And of course, there's the pocket edition of Music 101 afternoon news at 11. Tonight, highlights of last Saturday's broadcast. I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another evening, keeping you company through until midnight. My first guest after the news at 7 is our digital native, Charlie Cuff. You might have heard people talking about NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Now, it's almost like a digital proof of ownership. You can say, well, that meme that is on Facebook that you can Google and find, that meme belongs to you. But the funny thing about an NFT is it doesn't stop anybody else from copying and pasting that meme, should they want to, but still you have proof of ownership, and that seems to be enough for these things to increase in value. And it all sounds a little bit, well, pyramid to me. But it turns out that there's another thing you can use a non-fungible token for, an NFT, and that is to prove ownership of something that exists in the real world. Should you be lucky enough, for example, to own a Rolex. Now, how that works, I have no idea, but Charlie does, and he joins me after the news. at 7. In this half hour, we've got the latest report on the inner workings of Parliament with Phil Smith. First off, the detail is looking at a surge in elderly New Zealanders, baby boomers, reaching retirement age or older. And it's another one of those double whammies. You know, we've got the whole thing of reserve banks around the world pumping a lot of money into the economy during the lockdowns, and that spurred on inflation. And then suddenly there's a war going on in Europe, and that's further spurred on inflation. Well, we've got this double whammy back here, a surge in elderly people at the same time as there's a crisis in aged care nursing. The detail has the detail.
Kia ora, I'm Emile Donovan, and today on The Detail, a nursing pay inequity that's fueling a rest home crisis that's holding up hospital waiting lists. We all know New Zealand needs more nurses, but even within nursing, a gap is opening up.
We're not getting paid what we should be. We're not getting as paid as much as our DHB counterparts. So we just want fair pay. We want what we're owed.
New Zealand's aged care providers are at crisis point.
Rest homes are closing hundreds of their hospital beds because of a nursing shortage.
Well, the Aged Care Association says that staff shortages in the sector have reached crisis point. Some workers doing shifts of up to 24 hours straight.
The aged care sector is 20% short of nurses. It's forced the closure of some rest homes and the loss of 500 aged care beds in the last 6 months.
And it's coming at a time when we need to be preparing for the future.
Today we've got 83,000 people over 85 and in 2050 we'll have 383,000 people over 85.
Is that
true? Yes, so there's a lot more coming.
An extra 300,000 people over 85 within just over 30 years.
Yeah, it's amazing.
The providers say they aren't getting enough help to recruit, either financially or using other levers.
Nurses are flabbergasted. They are excluded from a new fast-track pathway for residency.
So today on the programme, how the aged care sector is structured in New Zealand, what the advantages and vulnerabilities are, and what could help to arrest this decline. Andrew Bevan is a reporter at the National Business Review. He wrote a detailed piece about this topic in mid-July.
I'd say a shortage of nurses is sort of the immediate issue caused by insufficient funding from central government and border closures and difficulty there. There's a massive difference in the wages paid by Te Wharaora or Health New Zealand, which makes competing for staff really, really difficult. And the really concerning long-term impacts of that are on the ability to provide equitable care for elderly, particularly those from working class backgrounds or in the regions. When you think of aged care, you sort of think of retirement villages, right? And they are insanely profitable companies. I mean, you've got Ryman and Somerset, those guys listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange, posting results, in the hundreds of millions of dollars annually.
But before we get into all that, let's get a grip on what aged care actually is and who provides it. Warwick Dunn is the Deputy Chair of the New Zealand Aged Care Association and Chief Executive of the Masonic Villages Trust.
Yeah, look, the reality is, sadly, as we age, our bodies and minds degenerate. Past generations used to have 3 generations living in a house, but changing expectations, things like women working, household finances requiring 2 people to work, has meant that the state has recognised the need to have a specialised area of care for older people. And the reality is that the type of care that folk need, particularly towards the end of their life, really is not able to be provided by family members.
Now, someone might be forgiven for thinking this is a branch of the health system. As a matter of fact, quite a considerable branch of the health system. So presumably the health system deals with all of this, the public health system. That's not the case, though, is it? Who does, by and large, provide aged care in New Zealand?
Back in the 1960s, the government used to provide it through district health boards, as they used to be known. But there was a realisation with the growing numbers that were forecast that they needed to have a better way of doing it. So they then provided funding and stimulus to largely initially charitable providers to actually set up specialised rest homes and hospitals. That initial growth of the sector has taken off over the last decades, and you now have a very specialised aged care sector that exists in New Zealand. We provide across the sector about 40,000 beds, and that contrasts with the 12,000 odd beds that the DHBs have, through which they provide higher level of care.
It strikes me that this is a crucial point, that the provision of aged care in New Zealand is not executed by Health New Zealand. It is, for lack of a better word, sort of outsourced to rest homes or specialised aged care providers, which are their own entities.
We like to think of ourselves as a very significant public-private partnership. If you look at the total number of beds that we've got, that roughly equates to about $6 billion worth of investment to actually establish those beds. And whilst we contract to the DHBs, we sit alongside them and need to work with them in terms of what we're doing.
There's also a lot of diversity among the owners and operators of these various care facilities. Some are owned by big, publicly listed companies like Ryman or Somerset. Some are privately owned for-profit ventures. Some are owned by charities and some by non-profits. But all of them are providing healthcare, so all of them do get a bit of money from the government. Providers go through a needs assessment to see if residents need rest home, hospital or dementia level care, and the money is allocated per day on that basis.
You've got three main day rates. The highest is hospital level care, you then have dementia level care, and then you have rest home level care. And apart from that variability, you've also got regional variability. So if you take, for example, a hospital level care resident in Auckland, a provider